Okay, so very briefly, let's look at the fighting capability section of Beyond This Point Be Dragons. These are some tables that are stuck in the middle of this draft document. But if you look at accumulative dice for hits, that's basically hit points. Fighting capability, right? So if I'm a fighting man, you see occasionally you get this negative in here. This came directly out of the draft that I had in front of me, and I thought, okay, I like it. It may be a typo, maybe not. And then because of the way that fighting capability is listed here too, right? These are 4 men, 5 men, 6 men. That's where I broke it down as additional attacks, right? This is the equivalency. I've got the equivalent fighting capability as a swordsman as 3 men. So if 3 men are coming at me, I should be able to handle them on an equal footing. Again, it all just kind of made sense to me, which is why I took this tangent. Upper level, you'll notice that the wizard can progress to higher levels of experience, and they can actually progress even further than that. This comes later as an optional rule in here, even though it's discussed in Beyond This Point Be Dragons, the draft document. It's discussed in a section and in such a way, I thought that those were optional additional levels. So we break it here at 11 for like the base game. Clerics. So the interesting thing about clerics is that it specifically says that they're skilled in medicine, which means that the healer trope goes back even before the release of any product. The thinking was already that clerics would have some role in healing. It must have come out playtesting that, Cure Light Wounds is an important spell to have, and therefore this is a role that is more natural to clerics. The other thing is that it's very clear in Beyond This Point Be Dragons that clerics should be part of an order or a monastery. And it says those things a couple of times in the rules, which means, in my mind, those are 2 distinct entities in the game world that's implied, and that there ought to be domain rules around them. So just keep that in mind. And the word order specifically relates to, the medieval militant orders that we saw in actual history. Same thing with monasteries. So I think those 2 organizations were implied by this rule set, and that they exist, and they should have complementary but different functions inside the game world when you're doing domain play. I think that was all implied by this rule set, and all that stuff got chopped by Gygax. Gygax, as you might know, he got an influx of cash. He was trying to get 0 edition to the marketplace. I think he didn't wait or didn't have time, because everybody that has talked about the original crew that put this stuff together will admit that maybe Arneson's way of typing things up or conveying ideas was not easy to digest. And I personally experienced that looking at the Judges Guild first fantasy campaign materials and Arneson's other RPG that he released a couple years later. Not the best writer. And so you can understand why Gygax might have made the decisions he did to turn it into a viable and profit-producing product. But unfortunately, what that means is some of this stuff didn't have a chance to get fleshed out the way it ought to, which is why I felt kind of compelled to do it. I thought that it was cool that this stuff was in there. It wasn't even seen in 0 edition. Certainly you don't see it in the BX line, nor do you see it going forward in AD&D and its successors. Okay, so clerics, no edged weapons, but again, First Fantasy campaign allows not only the introduction of a sword for magic users, but a sword for clerics, which is called specifically a holy sword. Again, I tie this back to the whole idea of paladins, militant orders. These things are all implied in the rules. Okay. I'll just leave that tantalizing hint there. The rest of this looks fairly much like what you would be used to in 0 edition. They've got the ability to cast spells. They don't get their first spell until second level. They have a hit dice progression that looks very much like the wizard progression, but they cap out at 8 with the patriarchs and the evil high priests. And again, law and order versus chaos is a theme here. So I'm not going to beat that much more. Turning it undead, again, not sure why this formatting screwed up in this particular draft document that I've got, but just ignore that for now. But basically, I decided to keep the specifically names, and then if this table was formatted correctly, you would see it's got the hit dice values too, going from 1 through 7. So from skeleton at 1 to vampire at 7 through 9 for vampires, I think is what it actually is. So races. Focus on the dwarf here. So it doesn't tell you can't use specific weapons or armor. It does say that as a generalization, there are preferences that the dwarven race has when it comes to equipping their people to become fighting men. And I guess I'll hit the pause button there, since I've mentioned fighting men a couple of times. You'll notice throughout that I use I use language the way I was trained to use it, which is all going to be he, him throughout the entire thing, from soup to nuts, and I make no bones or apologies about it. Same way I don't make any big deal about the fact that I use the Oxford comma, right? Except where I might occasionally forget to, but it's not on purpose. I use the Oxford comma. So when it comes to gender, so I do have a blurb about this entitled this other draft document, this other supplement that I'm working on the side too. Let's talk about gender for a second. So during the Middle Ages, there was actually a military order of knights that inducted into it women after a specific siege or battle. We also have the shield maidens from the northern European lands. There are numerous instances where this warrior female Amazon, the Greek legends of Amazons, numerous cases where it's obvious that women have been participants on the battlefield, both as gods and goddesses, and as avatars like the Valkyries, and as actual mortals here in this sphere. I don't make any big deal about it. I am contemplating at this time maybe just doing a complete find and replace for he, him, and replacing with she, her, and then coming back and looking at some of these titles that are gendered, like fighting man, and changing it to fighting woman, and having 2 separate documents that live side by side. Both, you don't have to pay different prices, just have both downloads available. And hey, if you want to open up the she, her document, go for it. There are in 0 edition no changes to your stats like you see in 1st edition AD&D, where being a different gender is subject to modification of some of your stats. None of that in 0 edition, and I think that's right. We'll just keep it a non-issue by not making a big deal about it. Let's just agree that that's how I'm going to approach it. I understand consenting adults might have a completely different opinion about how I should have put together the thing that I authored, and that's fine. You can hold that opinion, but I'm drafting this document the way I'm drafting it. But it's not been done because I believe, hey, 80 to 90% of the people that's going to read this document are males. I'm doing it this way because when I think about language, when I process language, because of 50 plus years, I won't tell you my exact age, but 50 plus years of writing and drafting documents and reading documents, and being, especially since my undergrad major was history and military history, right? Specifically, the gender language is there. It's internalized at this point, folks. I believe in neuroplasticity, but not that much neuroplasticity. So please give me a break if you think that I should have made a bigger issue out of it. Maybe I should have, who knows? But anyway, coming back to races, same thing here. The concept of race, right? Instead of switching the name to ancestry, which I considered doing that during the draft, right? Because that's I saw that in Shadow Dark and some other places. I'm just going to go with the original language because dwarves are their own separate species. I thought about species too, but I thought the word species, for whatever reason, to me, takes me completely out of the fantasy setting and drops my mind into science fiction. So I didn't use species, and I tried ancestry, but it just didn't seem to fit. So I'm sorry, folks. I'm keeping the original concept. The dwarves are a race; they are their own separate people. The same thing for the elves. Same thing for the halflings that you'll see on the next page. I apologize in advance if that offends somebody. I'm not going to change it. Dwarves. So dwarves cannot advance. Again, I believe these level caps are there for a reason, for game balance. I don't understand why the halflings are limited to just heroes, but maybe it has to do with the tie back to Tolkien, where halflings were specifically known to be not very adventurous, except Belladonna Took and some of the Tooks, and of course the Baggins line that is related to them might have picked up some of that adventurousness. But as a generality about that people, a mythical people, I'll remind you, right? We're arguing about dwarves, elves, and halflings that don't exist in real life. So let's not make too big a deal about the fiction here. As a fiction, it's interesting to me that the level cap for halflings is only 4th level, whereas with dwarves, you can go up to 6th level. The high resistance to saving throws versus magic is already applied to the tables for saving throws that follow. I did not make that clear here because I started running into limited space on the page, and the original language didn't have such caveats. And I can go on and on, as you can tell already. We're only on page 27 of this thing. We're only a tenth of the way, and I've probably been chatting for 40 minutes about Dragons Beyond. But anyway, not to belabor it, but when it says that they make their saving throws as though they're three levels higher against magic, it's in the tables already. You don't have to doubly apply it. And I think it's pretty clear too, since I put the tables next to each other. One reason I did that. Elves can be dual classed, but it's not the same as 0 edition. So it's like it is in 1st edition. You start at one class, and then you flip to the other class after a while. So with elves, you either start as a fighting man or you start as a magic user, and then provided you have the prime requisite into the class you're going to flip to, if that prime requisite is sufficiently high, score 13 or better, above average, right? Average is defined in these rules as 9 to 12. 13 or above means that if I'm I start as a fighting man, my intelligence, the prime requisite of magic user, is 13 or above, I can flip to magic user when I top out as fighting man. But I can't change the track, right? Once I'm on that fighting man track, I go until I reach the level progression limit, and then I flip. Vice versa, I can start as a magic user and then flip. Now, if you're a min-maxer, there's no reason why you would ever start an elf as a magic user. You would always start as a fighter under Dragons Beyond rules, because that's just the way the tables break down. I had to do a little bit of interpretation, and it's not very clear what happens to the hit points. And again, this is a nail I did not hammer down. When you flip, how do you do progression with hit points? Do you take a step backwards? Do you average out things? I don't know. I left it to you guys to figure it out. Run an elf, get them to max out as fighter and fighting man, and then flip them over to magic user and tell me what you did, because I'm not going to do it for you. Okay, so again, they've got these preferences about weapons and armor, including they usually fight bareheaded, but sometimes not. They usually use an elven longsword. They usually use elven armor. But again, these are preferences, not restrictions, which I heard something that YeOldeGeek was talking the other day about a rule set and restrictions. And I very much liked what he had to say about that. Moving on, the elves get this thing called precision missile fire, and so do the halflings. And when we play tested this elf, because of the way precision missile fire works, it's like having an 11th level fighter, which under these rules, there isn't even an 11th level fighting man. That does not exist. So the elf was especially deadly with missile fire. You can start out as an elf with a bow as a fighting man, switch over to magic user, continue to use that same bow, which is wild to me. I look forward to playing more upper level stuff, but during playtesting, we just did really low level people. Okay, I've been prattling on for way too long. Elvish and Dwarven as languages, they can only be learned by elves and dwarves, respectively, and halflings. For some reason, they let the halflings in on the secret. They don't like to teach outsiders their language. So you're not going to, as a human being, pick up Elvish or Dwarvish very easily because they don't trust you at all. Halflings, again, they get precision misflower, but they actually get a specific rule. I think it says and beyond this point be dragons, the wording is something like at anything they fire at, right? They've got the ability to like specifically pick out things, which modern day gamers calls a called shot. So that's the language I used, which was the modern language, which means these guys can be deadly accurate, but it's only with the sling. And since it's a halfling, not a staff sling, a hand sling. Yeah, we didn't have a halfling in the group. The other thing these guys get is move silently, kind of. It's tucked in here. I didn't call it out very specifically, but they've got the ability to basically sneak up on people because of their size. Another interesting thing with these guys is secret doors. So if they're cunning, which is the stand-in for wisdom in these rules, if their cunning is not high enough, they don't get the ability to detect secret doors at all. And halflings in this rule set don't have the ability to see in the dark. The other thing, since this is pre-zero edition, infravision doesn't get called infravision until later. I kept the original lingo here, right? So dwarves and elves see in the dark. Does that mean see in the dark for elves above ground and for dwarves below ground? I don't know. You tell me. It's another nail I did not hammer down. You figure it out, but it's not infravision. Don't make this infravision. Don't play Dragons Beyond informed by what came after 1974, if you can help it. Make it your own. Make it your own interpretation of this rule set. That's what I'm hoping for. That's what I want for you. Okay, I'm going to stop the video here, and then we'll get into saving throws next time.